Okay, you can begin.
Good morning, everyone. We are presentation 6, and we are doing chapter 9 from the Exploring Leadership textbook, Being in Communities. Our group consists of Amanda, Krishanta, and myself. This chapter will discuss the importance of community, elements of community, a common center, communities of practice, the development of community, and college communities.
Community plays a vital role within leadership and personal growth. Similarly, it represents a group of individuals who share similar values and ideas while working together to achieve a common goal. Now, with respect to the textbook Exploring Leadership, it shows us that knowing about a community and valuing its importance and skills helps to build and sustain essential aspects of relational leadership. Likewise, this presentation will seek to underline the effectiveness of communities in relationship. The importance of community in rational leadership. Now, when we think of leadership, we often picture someone standing in front of a group of people, simply giving instructions and making decisions. However, relational leadership is quite different as it takes a more ethical approach. You see, relational leadership focuses on relationships, collaboration, and building environments where individuals feel supported and personally connected. Now, one of the key ideas of relational leadership is community. Similarly, semi-communities are not just a group of people working together. It's a space where individuals can feel valued and encouraged to grow and develop. When rational leaders take serious actions towards their community, it creates a foundation where shared relationships can prosper. Here is a small video
Hello,
presentation from Brett
welcome to this
Tolman, who will further explain rational leadership.
video module on relational leadership. Today, we'll explore the distinction between positional and relational views of leadership using Komovitz, Lucas, and McMahon's 1998 book on college student leadership. First, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Brett Tallman. I'm an engineer in Bozeman working in product development, small-scale manufacturing, and the biomedical field. For the past several years, I've been exploring engineering education, and I'm now finishing my doctorate in industrial engineering. I'm really interested in the topic of engineering leadership, and I'm excited to have you along as we explore a little bit of it together.
To start with, let's take a moment to think about what leadership even is. Let me ask you a question. What's the first thing that comes to mind when I say leadership? Some might think of a powerful politician, maybe an important historical figure, or a business success, or even a fictional character. Usually people think of someone in charge, and for a long time, this is how we've thought of leadership. One individual leading many to do something great. Sometimes we call this positional leadership. And it might be the model that has guided your school experience thus far. But as civilization and technology has progressed, the challenges facing society require more than one great person. Technical competence, creative insight, or brainstorming have led to great advances in the world we see around us. For example, technical solutions often require a diverse team of experts working interdependently, with a combination of collaboration, autonomy, and trust. More than ever before, these challenges require groups that work together towards a common goal or a purpose. So we need to update our understanding of leadership to fit today's challenges. The relational approach proposes that we expand our understanding of leadership. In addition to something one person does, we can also envision leadership occurring in a way not based on position or authority. Rather, those with relevant skill, knowledge, or experience, they bear responsibility for the project when it's in their wheelhouse. This brings us to the relational approach to leadership. Leadership is defined as a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. In this process, members are engaged in working together towards a shared purpose. Maybe that purpose is clean drinking water in the developing world. Maybe it's a new orthopedic medical device, or developing a system that filters indoor recirculated air to eliminate viruses. What's the common theme in these? They're changes, hopefully positive, to the status quo. And they're accomplished by a team working with common purpose. The key component of this approach is working within the context of relationship. So members depend on each other. And each member bears responsibility for group success. For example, the water pump expert works with a site engineer. Because their fields are so entwined, neither can succeed without the expertise of the other. So what does this approach look like? The relational approach centers purpose at the heart of leadership. This means each member is committed to the group goal, such as a new product or innovation. An important aspect of this is empowerment. Rather than one authority surrounded by servants, this model of leadership suggests an interdependence between members. In other words, every member bears responsibility for project success, and they depend on each other. For example, to develop a new filtration system, one person may specialize in filters, one in airflow, and another in virus control. Each contributes in a special way. The third idea is ethics. If a group is to wield the power of change, the goal should be improving society, not exploiting it. And as an engineer, our professional mandate to protect the public welfare comes before our responsibility as employees. The third prong is inclusion. By integrating diverse perspectives in the pursuit of a goal, a broad, more balanced approach may be found by engaging many rather than few in the conversation. For example, we need not only to understand how airflow is important in the classrooms, but also in offices, restrooms, and common spaces. Finally, the idea that surrounds all this is process. What activities characterize the group? How are decisions reached? How are members included? How is purpose pursued? For example, is collaboration common? How about reflection? Is the community supportive? Is criticism civil? Is feedback transparent and fair? The context of process reminds us that leadership is not a static state, but a process. In sum, relational leadership proposes that contributing to a group's purpose is everyone's responsibility. Moreover, when all members are included and empowered to engage, the effectiveness of the group improves. Using this approach allows us to consider leadership with a focus on shared purpose in an ethical way that respects and values all involved.
Well, we've come to the end of today's brief introduction into relational leadership, and I hope this has given you some insight into more expansive ways of working with others towards a shared goal in meaningful, interdependent ways. Thank you for joining me today.
Understanding a community. Now let's start with what makes a community. Well, communities can typically exist anywhere, from our neighborhood, workplaces, classrooms, or even our online spaces. But the truth is, no community is ever perfect. They all come with disagreements, differences, and potential challenges. However, what makes communities important isn't perfection. It's basically about growing and supporting one another. As Wesley and Keller Rogers puts it, communities are constantly participating in conversations asking two main questions. Now, what are these questions, you may ask? It is, who are we and what matters? Let's think about these two questions interpret. Now, whether it be in a classroom, sports team, or even working on a group project, these questions are always asked. The question, who are we, primarily seeks to understand what makes us unique as a group. What matters, on the other hand, identifies what we stand for and what we want to achieve together as a group. These two questions help communities to grow through these ongoing conversations. Likewise, as these combos evolve, it shows individuals to share their ideas, experiences, and values, initially helping individuals to have a sense of belonging as their contributions matter. So when relational leaders think of group as communities, It helps them to create a space for dialogue, belonging, and shared purpose, ultimately allowing collective growth to perspire. Leadership and community building. Now, Gardner emphasized that skill in building and rebuilding of community is not just another of the innumerable requirements of contemporary leadership. It is one of the highest and most essential skills a leader can command. Based off this powerful statement, it shows us that true leadership is not only about directing tasks in building and rebuilding communities. It comprises of essential skills that every leader should require and master. A leader who can build a community can inspire trust, encourage collaboration, and even create an environment where people can contribute. Next slide, please. Likewise, relational leadership attempts building communities as a form of discipline. Now, the term discipline refers to the concept of study. Likewise, discipline shows that skills of relational leadership is not something you have or don't have. It's something you have to study, learn, and practice for. Just like how you would with any academic subject, such as history or even English. In addition, relational leadership underlines that the responsibility is not only to support individuals, but is also essential in creating the context in which individuals work together as a group or organization. When leaders practice or establish the essential goals in community building, they can transform groups into meaningful communities. What communities feel like? Now, I want you guys to think of a moment, right? When you were part of a great team or group. Perhaps it was a committee or even a club. Chances are you felt a sense of belonging, where your ideas, contributions were valued, and your voice mattered. You probably had a connection, and you probably want to work together with this group in future projects. On the other hand, you may have also experienced a situation where it was quite the opposite. Most likely, the task would still get done, but there was probably little connection, lack of trust, and little commitment within the group. Now, this constant shows us why community is so important. Without it, groups might succeed on paper, but they don't create positive, lasting experiences. Within within community, people don't just succeed; they prosper continuously. Overall, this shows a difference in what relation leadership makes in building community. Now, here's an example from Trisha Fields, who had chaired the spring leadership trip at Texas A&M University. Now, she says, I feel a part of a community within a group of people at church camp. Each group have been a part of this has been characterized by the formation of a group convent, a common purpose, trust, acceptance of people's emotional levels, the willingness to share, the security to reveal emotions, the thoughts and opinions without any particular type of criticism. Strong role models within the surroundings groups, and it had time for both fun activities and serious activities. I will now hand you over to my colleague Shai, who will now explain the elements of community. Thank you.
A community is most often described as a social group that not only shares an identity and structured pattern of interaction, but also a common geographical territory. It is also the attitude of connection and commitment that sustains a community's relationship and purpose. Communities often Communities often foster a sense of belonging and mutual support. Sharing that community commitment is the essence of relational leadership. Communities know that they are a group of people who work together and trust each other to achieve their goals. Teamwork requires processes to make decisions, communication channels, and a commitment to some level of participation by community members. Gardner extends the traditional definitions of community to refer to effective communities as those who practice these 8 elements. 1. Wholeness, incorporating diversity. 2. A shared culture. 3. Good internal communication. 4. Caring, trust, and teamwork. 5. Group maintenance and governance. 6. Participation and shared leadership tasks. 7. Development of young people or new members. And 8. Links with the outside world. So I'm sure some people have maybe been in a community where they were probably missing some of these um, 8 elements. So effective communities realize, okay, don't pay attention. Okay. Effective communities realize they are not insular, but are in a constant dynamic interaction with their broader environment. Many traditional views of community are changing. Conventional views present communities as homogeneous groupings of people who have much in common. These people may even resemble each other in ideology, race, or class. Cultural and ethnic diversity, and all other forms of diversity as well, are necessary resources for building community. A true community cannot exist without diversity. Diversity of ideas, skills, experiences, and worldviews bring to a group's shared goals the many talents of people gathered as a community. If everyone in the community saw everything in the same way, had the same skills and life experiences, their ability to be resilient and face change would be limited. Other traditional views have held that communities need face to face interactions. However, the term community also describes those with common identity and interactions, but without geographical proximity. Electronic networks have provided a creative way for communities of common interest to interact. Chat rooms, blogs, comment sections, and discussion forums and online sites such as Discord or Reddit are linking people across the globe. Some other communities I can think of are maybe the gaming community, the art community, food community, maybe animal lovers, and if you could think of any other communities that you are part of online. Some say these electronic modes of communication may diminish community with their lack of face-to-face interactions. However, the effective and responsible use of electronic communication can aid these communities. These communities also provide support for people in minority groups such as LGBTQ and disabled community. I'm sure we all relate, but as human beings, we all want meaningful connections to others and settings that are inclusive and empowering. The epitome of effective communities is when purposeful change is being accomplished through ethical and collaborative processes. Relational leadership flourishes in settings that value the elements of community. Martin Buber said in 1958 that some form of community is what makes life worth living in our life together. According to him, a community is a group of people who have come together around a common center. A true community is made up of individuals with different minds and complementary natures rather than a group of like-minded people. A common center. It is essential that developing communities depend on relational leadership that deeply values the inclusion of all members, empowering to work together towards a common purpose. In these communities, openness is a central practice. A proper conversation requires listening and being willing to give up the drive for control. even when one's ideas and thoughts clash with others. Being unwilling to give up control leads to a monologue that cannot foster community. And I'm sure a lot of people have been in a community where one person is just extremely controlling and where you don't really feel that sense of community and belonging. Realizing that one's personal wants won't always come first is necessary for being in a community. Baba reminds us that this does not mean accepting the views of others just to create false peace. Rather, it means keeping in mind the commitment of greater values. Communities truly exhibit the difference between exposed values and actual behaviors to which people are committed. I'm sure some people have seen the way someone may talk versus the way they may act. John Donne said, "No man is an island unto himself." I believe these immortal words to mean that while we can and often must function individually to achieve personal goals and self confidence, we must interact with our friends, our family, and our community. Through working with a community of people, one can learn acceptance and equality. There's a necessary sharing of ideas and technologies. By working as a team and building on each other's ideas, plans, and ideas, plans and ideas are not just created, but are evolved into better, clearer plans. Enthusiasm and success are contagious. You can't just spread it to yourself. Christopher Mowbray. Now I move on to the next speaker.
Okay, good day everyone. Let's discuss communities of practice. So, being a member of a community does not necessarily mean active participation. Some may only be a passive member or just a name on a list. But what do we mean by being a passive member? You may be highly involved and committed to the success of the various groups you are affiliated with. For example, your fraternity, class council, ethnic, or religious groups. But this makes you a general member. Because of limitations such as limited time, disinterest, or shifting priorities, you may not be an active participant. Thus, a community of practice is different from general membership because it requires active engagement, commitment with those who you are working with. The people in these communities are doing something, and you are part of that in a meaningful way. Draft and Paulus quotes that each person belongs to many communities of practice, but with varying degree of centrality. In some communities of practice, we are only peripherally involved. In others, we are centrally involved. For instance, you may have intentionally decided to devote more time and energy to your family, to some special needs in your job, or to your senior thesis project. So you cannot do as much as you might like in your worship community or in your other organizations. Thus, it is evident that people participate at different levels depending on their priorities. Even within the same environment, while surrounded by people, some still remain isolated, while others form close connections by socializing and working together. Large environments, such as universities, can contain what Harvard sociologist Herbert Gans calls urban villages. These are smaller communities that create more personal networks through group activities like projects or discussions. Next slide, please. The social networks we form in these communities of practice are critical in achieving shared goals and developing our personal identification and satisfaction. Robert Putnam noted that Americans were becoming less involved in civic life and saw declines in indicators like labor unions, church attendance, and PTA meetings. He outlined that in his observations, between 1980 and 1993, the total number of bowlers in America increased by 10%, while league bowling decreased by 40%. So he concluded that Americans were now bowling alone. In other words, people were still doing activities, but they were doing them alone or in smaller groups without the broader community. At the same time, new environmental groups started to arise, like the Sierra Club, book clubs, hobby clubs, and support groups have grown to the point that 40% of Americans claim to be part of a group that cares for and support members. Most Americans have replaced socializing with neighbors with socializing with friends and colleagues from the workplace. This shift was concerning because it reduced what Putnam called social capital, the features of social organizations such as networks, norms, and social trust that facilitate coordination and cooperation for mutual benefit. Thus, without strong social capital, communities become weaker and less connected. In short, Putnam was warning that Americans were moving away from groups that needed strength that strengthened the whole communities and toward groups that mainly served one's personal needs. This harmed civic life and democracy in the long run. So, how can these communities best function to fully engage community members? The policies, behaviors, expectations, norms, and other structures may prohibit or promote your meaningful involvement in that community. For example, if you are a part-time worker in an office culture that includes you in decision making, recognizes your contributions, and celebrates your success will strengthen your sense of belonging and bond you to the community. Continuing on, being a community requires an awareness of reciprocal processes. An individual has to decide to be part of the larger community, and the community has to involve and welcome these individuals. Harvard sociologist Charles Wiley asserts that in any community, that is work, classroom, neighborhood, or volunteer organization, there are concurrent obligations of contributive justice and distributive justice. So, firstly, contributive justice. Each individual must practice contributive justice by contributing to the group's belief that it is fair and reasonable for each member to do their part in the greater whole, uphold obligations, and commit to the shared purposes of the group. Distributive justice, on the other hand, the community must practice the distributive justice of caring for all community members and ensuring that each is included, heard, and not disadvantaged through community membership. Some people in communities do not uphold their responsibilities nor share the transcendent values that bind the community together. Communities sometimes act to remove these members who are not willing to uphold shared values. So, for example, a member of a lab team who sabotages another team's experiments and research is not appropriate for the community. This means that this person did not align with the morals of the group, so they were removed. Ulrich states that communities thrive on serial reciprocity. So, what does this mean? Serial reciprocity entails that one person helping another who then helps someone else creates a cycle of support. For example, on a residence floor, Chris may help Mary move her refrigerator, and Mary repays his kindness, not necessarily by helping Chris back, but when she helps her floor mate, Diane, put up flyers in the hall, Diane likewise repays Mary, and so on. This ongoing exchange builds a civic culture that sustains the community. Next slide. Okay. Arun Gandhi shares many lessons he learned from his grandfather, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Among these lessons were his grandfather's reflections on what caused violence in human life. These lessons by Gandhi actually became iconic and is often referred to as the seven deadly sins. But what do they actually mean? Well, wealth without work refers to the practice of getting something done for nothing, manipulating markets so that you don't have to work or produce added value. Pleasure without conscience. Many people want to enjoy pleasures without a sense of responsibility. The query of the greedy has always been what's in it for me. Knowledge without character. Education or intelligence is dangerous if not guided by integrity and values. Commerce without morality. A business that ignores ethics exploits people and society. Science without humanity. Scientific progress without compassion can cause destruction instead of improving lives. Worship without sacrifice. Without sacrifice, we may become caught up in the social facade of religion, but inactive in its practices. Politics without principle. Leadership without honesty or values leads to corruption and injustice. And finally, rights without responsibilities. Claiming freedoms without accepting duties to others undermines community. So this wraps up communities of practice, and now we'll be moving on to development of community. So when new groups form, like students in a dorm, a class, or a committee, this doesn't necessarily mean that community automatically appears. Rather, it must be built intentionally. Scott Peck has identified 4 stages of developing true authentic community. The first stage, pseudo-community. In this stage, a group may feel like things are just fine, people are polite, and seem to be getting along. Relationships are courteous, but in reality, it is an undeveloped level of community. Pseudo-community is conflict avoiding. True community is conflict resolving. The second stage of community building is chaos, where people's different views begin to clash. Different members are now asserting their perspectives and pushing their own agendas. This stage can be dangerous because some give up instead of working through its challenges. Peck claims that it is important to find meaning in the idea that even fighting is better than pretending you are not divided. Continuously, Peck observes that groups take one or two parts out of chaos, either organization or emptiness. Organization leaves the source of fighting untouched by establishing structures and systems to manage and handle the differences of opinion. These structures may solve the immediate problem, but the source of tension and disagreement may fester. Emptiness is Peck's term for the process of community members emptying themselves of their barriers to true communication. Thus, emptiness becomes the stage in community building. Emptiness, though difficult, allows real understanding to develop. In other words, members letting go of their egos, assumptions, and stereotypes. This carries us to stage 3, which is emptiness. This is the stage where members realize that personal feelings, assumptions, ideas, and stereotypes become barriers to truly listening and understanding, as well as being understood. Again, emptiness refers to members dropping these barriers and preconceived notions that block true communication. And the final stage, authentic community. Once emptiness is achieved, the group can reach true community. Conflict still arises, but there are ways to be heard and understood, and the community members know that they cannot reach any level of agreement without prior disagreement to create truly better decisions. This means that members now trust each other enough to disagree productively. Building community is creating a feeling of we instead of I's. Many groups never get past the pseudo community and find ways to courteously interact and get the work done. But groups doing serious and ongoing work benefit the most from reaching the stage of authentic community. Communities that engage in this developmental process and reach a stage of authentically functioning as a community often fail by not recognizing that being in a community is a process and not an end state. Communities are not static, they constantly change. New members join the group, external crises arise, loss of key members can all contribute to more conflict and disagreements. Thus, communities must recognize when they need to attend to the cycle of rebuilding a genuine community. Participants want to be highly engaged in the work of any community need to assess the ways in which they can become effective members. 7 principles for building the community are being committed. Commitment to others is a prerequisite for community to exist. Being mindful, thinking about what to do, what to say, and focusing on the process, not the outcome. Being unconditionally accepting others as they are, not trying to change or control them. Being concerned for both yourself and others. Engage in dialogue whenever it is possible and consult others on issues that affect them. Being understanding. Strive to understand others as completely as possible. Being ethical. Engage in behavior that is not a means to an end, but behavior that is morally right. Being peaceful. Do not be violent or deceitful, and strive for internal harmony. So while participants see their group as a community and use these principles, they listen better, respect differences, and resolve conflicts more effectively. As the only challenges us to lay claims on others to be similarly involved in and dedicated to community. Modeling and practicing this kind of participation is essential to being a contributing community member. Relational leadership is directly linked with building community. This table helps us to illustrate the connections among the elements of relational leadership with the understandings of the elements of community. So as we can see under relational leadership, inclusive relates to the element of community, wholeness, incorporating diversity, being committed and accepting. Under relational leadership, empowering relates to the elements of community, shared group culture, group maintenance, and governance. Ethical relates to being caring, trustworthy, and teamwork. Purposeful relates to participation and shared tasks. Process-oriented relates to good internal communication. So that is the end of development of community, and I'll now pass you to Amanda, who will continue.
Hi guys, so now I'm going to be talking about college communities. Now, for centuries, various college campuses have called communities of scholars or even learning communities. However, a true sense of community is not always shared by everyone. Likewise, hate incidents may sometimes happen on campus, along with disrespect in Senate sessions, creating certain groups to minimize goals of other groups, as not all individuals may know or care about each other. The CRN Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching underlined an investigation of what students, facility, and staff members would want to improve about campus life. All groups that agreed that they needed a new sense of community that would embrace differences towards finding a common purpose. Similarly, the foundation established that healthy college communities would be purposeful, open, just, disciplined, caring, and celebrative. Now, these values help to create an environment where fairness and belonging are real experiences for everyone, additionally helping colleges to become a community that embodies the idea of learning and growing together. Multiple communities, one campus. Now, a college campus is a unified group that's just almost as a community that has interconnected communities. This may include students, administrators, facility members, and staff. Now, within these groups exist smaller community clusters, which may include graduates, students, cultural clubs, and even seniors. Each community has its own goals, priorities, and traditions, and particularly functions, but all of them share a common goal. For instance, a sports team may value teamwork and discipline, whereas a student organization may focus on advocacy and friendship. Despite their initial difference, both groups share a common purpose of learning and personal growth. Likewise, a college is therefore a microscopic society filled by diverse yet independent communities. Simply recognizing this community structure helps people to see that diversity can help strengthen a college rather than dividing it. When every group feels a sense of value and connection, the campus community becomes more healthier, collaborative, and reflective. Collaboration and shared purpose. Building a healthy college community requires significant communication, teamwork, and understanding. Don Roberts, a student leader from the Gulf Coast Community College, demonstrated that by serving as both student body president and as a president of Disabled Student Organization, she observed that administrators and students often have different focuses. For example, administrators cared more about the budget, policies, and reputation, whereas the students focus on pursuing and fulfilling the needs of fellow students, the environment, the community, and even dealing with potential issues. Now, at first, these priorities may seem conflicting and different, but collaboration brought meaningful results that benefited both sides. In general, Robert's experience showed us that strong communities do not happen by accident. They are initially created through cooperation and empathy. Similarly, when individuals take the time to listen and respect each other's perspective and ideas, they build trust and a shared purpose through collaboration, therefore building a healthy college. From campus to global community. The initial idea of community on campus often reflects the larger concept of a global community. Colleges are small scale versions of the world where they can be diverse, complex, and independent. Scholars such as Morris and Heltman described that the 21st century communities are those that embrace difference, build cohesion, and release positive energy. Now, the health of the global community depends on the health of its smaller parts, which may include college campuses. When we create open, fair, and caring college environments, we practice the same skills needed to sustain and connect into the global world. Similarly, building relationships, respecting diversity, and resolving conflicts on campus initially prepares students to become global citizens beyond college.
So that was the end of our presentation. So a quick summary. Viewing any group or organization as a community of people working together to achieve shared goals strengthens relational leadership. When individuals seek themselves as part of community, they are connected by mutual expectations and responsibilities. This sense of belonging encourages open communication and collaboration, which relates to qualities of effective leadership. Thus, to flourish, communities require relational leadership practices that value community as a foundation for meaningful change to occur.
So, in conclusion, Chapter 9, Being in Communities, reminds us that communities are essential because they give meaning to leadership by connecting people and around common goals, values, and responsibilities. Leadership is not solitary, but a shared process that depends on the strength of the community. Thus, to become leaders, we must first learn how to be part of a community by listening, including others, and building trust.
So, to end our presentation, we just have one question. This may not relate to you, but you could still think of it. Think about a healthy community that you are or were associated with and identify its characteristics. Now, think of a community you know of that is unhealthy or is in the early stages of community development. What has contributed to the status of this community? How would you go about strengthening this community? Um, so we'd like to thank you for listening to our presentation. And yeah.